Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Up Late with Ivy. I am your host, Ivy Rush, and today I've got a really cool story for you. It's another one from Reddit. That's where I've been getting all of my stories lately, with permission, of course. And I'm so excited to share it with you. I'm recording this on a Sunday, and I'm just taking it easy today. I went to a Pride festival yesterday in my city, and it was so much fun, and I'm just taking the day today to record, relax, and yeah, I'm really excited, so let's just get into it. The Man Behind the Counter by RespectTheFancy. Sunday, October 12th, 1969. Can I help yous? Martin Macbeth glared over the register towards the corner of the shop at the man reading today's print of the Havre Times, the local newspaper for Havre de Grace, Maryland. Macbeth was a short, plump British man whose drab gray sweater seemed to match his everlasting drab gray mood. Hello? The man slowly tilted his head up until he made eye contact. He gave a courteous nod. Macbeth was not amused. What are you doing? The man gestured toward his paper. His dark blue suit was strangely formal for this part of town. The headline was an announcement of the death of Paul Stein, a cab driver shot and killed in San Francisco. October 12th, 1969. Written by Eric Gold. Zodiac Killer Strikes Again. Last night in San Francisco, cab driver Paul Stein was murdered in cold blood at the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Authorities believe the shooting is connected to the recent string of killings attributed to the man known only as the Zodiac. Police urge all citizens to remain vigilant. Witnesses describe the assailant as a stocky white male, approximately 5'8", with short brown hair and thick-rimmed glasses. You can't just sit here if you's not gonna buy something. Leave the man alone, Mart, sighed George Finney as he walked out of the back room. He just wants to read his paper somewhere quiet, away from the busy street. He's not doing any harm. But he's been there for half a bloody hour, Macbeth exclaimed. So, who cares? Replied Finney. This seemed to have shut Macbeth up. The man left just before the shop closed. Until then, the day's activities continued as normal. There were a few murmured complaints from Macbeth, but other than that and the usual flow of customers in and out of the shop, nothing else happened that day. Monday, October 13th, 1969. The man returned the next day, just 7 minutes after the shop had opened. George Finney watched from behind the counter. Back so soon? The man offered forth not, but a reserved wave and a tap of his newspaper. Macbeth had not come in yet. Today's headline of the Havre Times told about the robbery of First National Bank. October 13th, 1969. Written by Eric Gold. First National Bank robbed. First National Bank was robbed at 9:20 p.m. last night. The suspect, Bogdan Ovyachenko, is still at large for the thievery of $54,700. Suspect is approximately 5'9", white skin color, skinny build with a scar on the right cheek. Suspect is believed to still be residing within Havre de Grace. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Bogdan Ovyachenko, please notify Sheriff Frank Paler or stop by his office at 102 North 5th Street. The article below was an advertisement for a local bakery, and below that was an update on Paul Stein's funeral date. Macbeth arrived at the shop over 3 hours late at 11:43 a.m. He glowered at the man while he settled into his chair, thinking long and hard about what to say in order to create the greatest conflict. He ultimately said nothing, deciding instead to expend his energy scolding the woman who had come in to try to sell an obviously fake designer watch for a significant markup. This day went much like the previous: murmured complaints from Macbeth and the usual customer flow in and out of the shop. Nothing else happened that day. Tuesday through Friday, October 14th through 17th, 1969. The week went on in a similar fashion. The man would show up early, exchange passing glances and the occasional wave with Finney, and then he would sit in the corner until closing time. The days began to stack up. At home on Thursday evening, Finney figured that if the man is to become a regular occurrence in the shop, it may be beneficial to develop a friendship. So, that next day, Finney took his lunch break early and sat next to the man. Unsure of how to start the conversation, Finney went with the most basic of questions. "What are you reading?" The man looked up, then gestured toward his paper. October 17th, 1969. Written by Eric Gold. Mets win World Series. The New York Mets went into the day's 5th game of the World Series on the threshold of their first World Championship. And nothing about the amazing Mets is more amazing than the way they finally got both feet on the doorstep to the throne room. "You a baseball fan?" asked Finney. The man nodded. "Damn, guess the Orioles lost, huh?" The man nodded once more. "Although I guess if not for the Orioles, I would want the Mets to win. So it worked out. Jack DeLauro is a family friend of mine. By the way, I don't think I ever properly introduced myself. I'm George Finney. Nice to meet you." Finney offered his hand, reluctantly shook by the man. "What's your name?" Now this was a question the man seemed to think too personal of a question to ask. So with this, he turned back to read his paper, and thus the conversation ended. Saturday, October 18th, 1969. The next day, Finney was alone in the shop early. Macbeth had called out, citing a bloody nose that wouldn't stop, though George suspected that he'd simply gotten drunk. The man came in right on time. "Mornin'," Finney greeted, raising a hand and offering a smile. The man gave the usual small wave. Finney walked over to the man, seated in his usual spot, and read the headline over his shoulder. October 18th, 1969. Written by Eric Gold. Local man missing. Sheriff Frank Paler has reported that Robert Bobby Driscoll, aged 31, was last seen 2 nights ago leaving the Rusty Crab Tavern, wearing a red sweater. Driscoll, described as 6 foot and slender with brown hair, has not been heard from since. Any sightings or information on his whereabouts should be reported immediately. Finney rubbed his chin. "That's a shame. Bobby was an old friend." The man said nothing. Customers trickled in. A lady bought a set of used candlesticks. A kid came in to trade baseball cards. The hours passed slowly, and Finney was up to his knees in work behind the counter. Once, Finney thought he caught the man watching him, but his eyes quickly returned to his paper. By 5 p.m., the man was still there, reading. Sunday, October 19th, 1969. The next day, the corner store opened late at 1 p.m., as is usual for them on Sundays. By the time Finney arrived around noon, the man was already sitting outside. He followed Finney into the store. Macbeth staggered in as close to 1 p.m. as possible, without technically being late. He was mumbling something about artificial sweeteners. He looked across the store at the man. The man was staring back. "Could have used you yesterday, Mart," Finney said dryly. "Yeah, well, I had that headache, mate, remember?" Macbeth snapped back. Finney couldn't help but smirk. "Thought it was a nosebleed." Macbeth grunted. "That too." The man was still staring. Macbeth made a face, and the man returned to his paper. Finney sighed and made his way over to the chair in the corner. "What's today's headline?" asked Finney. But the man still had yesterday's issue, October 18th, 1969, written by Eric Gold. "Local man missing. Sheriff Frank Paler has reported that Robert Bobby Driscoll, aged 31, was last seen 2 nights ago leaving the Rusty Crab Tavern wearing a red sweater. Driscoll, described as 6'0" and slender with brown hair, has not been heard from since. Any sightings or information on his whereabouts should be reported immediately." Finney rubbed the back of his neck. "Paper not come today?" he asked, leaning over slightly. The man said nothing. Finney gestured toward the door. "Mailman usually drops off the new batch around this side. I can grab you one real quick if you—" Before he could finish, the man reached out and grabbed his arm. His touch wasn't violent, but it was firm enough to make Finney pause. The man shook his head once, slow but deliberate. Finney blinked, surprised. "All right, then." He chuckled nervously, easing back. "Yesterday's issue it is." The rest of the afternoon drifted by lazily. A few customers trickled in, an old woman hunting for a brass lamp, a teenager picking through used comic books, an old man who rang up a case of Coca-Cola and a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. At 2:30, the baseball kid came back in, clutching something. "Hey, Mr. Finney," he called. Finney glanced up from sorting a box of records. "Hey there, kid, what you got?" The boy grinned and held up a baseball card, autographed. "It's Jack DeLauro. Got it from a trade this morning." Finney smiled and motioned the kid over. He took the card carefully, admiring the glossy surface. "Now that's a good pull," he said, handing it back. "You know, he's a family friend of mine. I just may even get you a chance to meet him someday. You hang on to that one." The kid's eyes were glowing. The man in the corner watched, his paper drooping slightly as he peered over it. His expression, as always, was unreadable. Monday, October 20th, 1969. The next morning, Monday, brought an angry kind of rain, a slashing, sideways rain that rattled the windows and puddled the sidewalks before noon. The shop still opened in the storm. Macbeth was predictably absent again. Finney shook his head as he hung up his jacket, water dripping onto the floor. He was about to switch on the coffee pot when the bell above the door jingled. The man, soaked from head to toe, his usual newspaper clutched beneath his coat. "You're a brave soul," Finney said, flipping on the coffee machine. "Come, warm yourself up. Coffee's on the house today." Finney poured 2 mugs, sliding one across the counter toward the man. The man stared at it for a long while, as if trying to figure out what it was. Finally, he lifted it carefully and took a tentative sip. Finney smiled to himself. Small victories. As the man sat, Finney caught sight of the newspaper under his arm, still the same issue from October 18th. But this time, something was different. Finney blinked. There, scrawled messily in wet, partially smeared red ink, were 2 words circled in the news blurb. Red sweater. The man said nothing. The day dragged on, rain hammering against the windows like the steady patter of a drum. Around 4 p.m., the front door jingled again. A man walked in, tall, wiry, twitchy. He walked over to the register. Finney barely had time to process it before the man pulled a pistol from his jacket and slammed it down on the counter, pointing it straight at Finney's chest. "Empty the till," the man growled in a heavy accent. "Now." Finney's hands shot up instinctively. His heart thundered in his ears. He swallowed, glancing at the man's face, a scar carved down his right cheek like a fault line. Bogdan Ovyachenko, the bank robber. Behind him, the man in the blue suit folded his papers silently. "Don't make me say it again," barked Ovyachenko, jabbing the gun forward into Finney's gut. Finney fumbled with the register, sweat slicking his palms. His mind raced. He had to get help, somehow. It was then he noticed the man in the blue suit out of the corner of his eye. He was standing up, slowly, almost casually, his face blank, calm. In one fluid movement, the man picked up the scalding hot coffee pot from the warmer and, without hesitation, flung its contents across the room. Ovyachenko screamed, staggering back as the steaming liquid hit him square in the face. A gunshot rang out, piercing the air with a deafening crack. Finney ducked instinctively, hitting the floor behind the counter as shards of ceiling tile and dust rained down. For a moment, everything was chaos, the metallic scent of blood and burnt coffee hanging thick in the air. The man had already moved to disarm Ovyachenko, wrestling the weapon from the gunman's slippery, burned hands with surprising strength. Finney didn't wait. He bolted for the phone and jabbed at the rotary dial, calling the sheriff's office. "Armed robbery! Ovyachenko's here! Corner store! Send someone quick!" he shouted. Within minutes, the bell above the door jingled again. Sheriff Paler stormed in, gun drawn. "Drop it!" he barked. The man released Ovyachenko and stepped back, hands raised. Ovyachenko dropped to the floor, howling, clutching his scorched face. Paler cuffed him without a second thought, muttering curses under his breath. Meanwhile, the man calmly took a napkin, a pre-folded wet wipe from his jacket pocket, and wiped down his coffee cup with meticulous care, especially the handle. Once finished, he used the wipe to place the cup upside down on the counter and, without a word, slipped out the door into the pouring rain. Finney just stood there, breathless, hands still trembling, as Paler took his witness statement. Tuesday, October 21st, 1969. The next morning, Finney opened the shop alone. The man did not come. Macbeth did. He swaggered in just before noon, shaking water from his umbrella and wearing a smug grin. "Looks like your main ain't here today," he said, voice thick with satisfaction. Finney's jaw tightened. "He saved my life yesterday, you know," he said sharply, "while you were at home recovering from whatever you drank yourself into." Macbeth scoffed. "Saved your life, my ass. Probably just looking to make himself the hero. You're just a gullible sod." Finney slammed a ledger down on the counter, startling a middle-aged woman browsing the candy rack. The woman looked up briefly, then turned back to her shopping without so much as a glance at Macbeth. "He's a better man than you," Finney snapped. "At least he showed up. At least he gave a damn. Where the hell were you, huh?" Macbeth's face turned purple. "This is your own bloody fault for being soft," he spat, "and befriending that bloody weirdo you dragged in off the street." "The weirdo is the only reason I'm still standing here," Finney shot back, stepping out from behind the register. His voice tangled into a harsh, ugly knot of shouting. The customers, what few there were, scuttled out hurriedly, clutching their purchases. Even the baseball kid backed toward the door, wide-eyed and confused. Macbeth leaned towards Finney, grabbing his arm. "You think he's better than me?" he hissed. "You think you're safe with him? Some mute freak who watched you all day like a bloody hawk with a secret affection?" "You know what, Mart?" Finney started, clearly annoyed. I don't want to hear it. The only reason anyone puts up with you is because they're too damn tired to argue. As am I. I'm not listening to your bullshit anymore today. Go home, or I'll call Frank and have you escorted out. With a furious grunt, Macbeth shoved the stack of newspapers off the counter, sending them tumbling to the floor in a crumbled heap. To hell with this place. To hell with you, he spat, grabbing his coat from the rack. As Macbeth stormed out the door, Finney caught a glimpse, just for a moment, of a figure standing across the street under a crooked street lamp. A dark blue suit. The man. But when Finney blinked, the corner was empty. Gone like smoke. Wednesday, October 22nd, 1969. The next day felt different. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air thick and heavy. Finney opened the shop alone, the help wanted sign still taped crookedly to the front window. At 8:07 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. Finney glanced up, expecting the usual nod, the usual silent shuffle toward the corner. But instead, the man walked straight behind the counter and pulled out the stool usually reserved for employees. Finney blinked. Hello? The man said nothing. Instead, he adjusted the cash register, wiped down the counter with a folded napkin from his pocket, and stood patiently behind the till. Finney just stared. The baseball kid wandered in then, a crumpled dollar in his hand and a shiny new pack of cards on his mind. Hey, Mr. Finney, got any tops left? I'm chasing Mickey Mantle. The man silently rang him up, quicker and neater than Finney ever did, giving the kid his change with a small nod. Thank you, Mr. Finney. The kid grinned, completely unfazed, and skipped out the door. Finney still half expected to wake up. Guess you're hired, he mused. The peace didn't last. At exactly 11:39 a.m., Macbeth came stomping in, dragging a fresh foul mood and an equally foul aroma behind him. He stopped dead at the sight of the man working at the front counter. What the bloody hell is this? Macbeth shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger. Finney sighed, setting down a crate of old magazines. He's helping out. Helping out? Are you bloody insane? You can't just... Maybe he saw the type of worker you are. Finney cut him off sharply. The type of person you are, and figured someone ought to do the job properly. Maybe he figured it out when I almost got shot while you were passed out drunk. Macbeth's face twisted into something dark and furious. You think you're some hero now, Finney? Think you're some martyr because you weren't shot by some Soviet bank robber? Macbeth jeered, red-faced and breathing hard. Finney could smell the alcohol in his breath. He felt something break inside him, like a tether snapping loose. No, Martin, I think I'm lucky, he said, his voice low and shaking. Lucky I had someone there who actually cared. One who doesn't hide behind excuses and leave his friends to fend for themselves while he drinks himself to death alone in his apartment on a Monday of all days, just because he doesn't know how to handle a divorce like a normal fucking person. A deafening silence followed, broken only when Finney continued. I can see now, by the way. I can see why Carol left you. You're not smart. You're not tough. You're just pathetic. Always have been. And you're a very, very sorry excuse for a husband. You're lucky she left you the house, but I bet that, too, was out of pity. Macbeth's mouth worked open and closed like a dying fish. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, rattling the glass in the frame as he slammed the door. Second day in a row. Second time he left the shop in ruins behind him. The rest of the afternoon passed strangely quiet. The man continued to work alongside Finney like it was the most natural thing in the world. Checking customers out, organizing the comic books, straightening the rack of chewing gum. Still silent, still watching. By the time he flipped the close sign at 7 p.m., Finney almost felt like they had settled into a rhythm. He was wiping down the counter when the man spoke his first full sentence. "You were there Thursday night, at the Rusty Crab." The words were quiet, measured, final. Finney froze, the rag slack in his hand. No, he stammered. "No, I wasn't. I was home. But when he looked up, the man was already gone. That night, Finney trudged home under the eerie orange glow of the streetlights. The world felt off, like the ground had tilted slightly, just enough to make walking strange. When he reached his apartment door, he noticed it immediately. A small box sitting neatly at the foot of the door frame, wrapped in torn, faded red paper. No note, no name. Finney crouched down slowly, heart hammering in his chest. He peeled away the damp paper with trembling fingers. Inside was a red sweater. Simple, itchy-looking. Exactly like the one described in the missing person report. Finney stared at it for a long, long time, the weight of it growing heavier in his hands by the second. Across the street, under the halo of a street lamp, he knew he saw the faint outline of a man in a dark blue suit, watching, waiting. Finney barely slept that night. The red sweater sat balled up in the corner of his apartment, like a bloodstain he couldn't scrub out. When he finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, he dreamed of water, a river, pulling him along the shore, pulling him out to sea so far even the lighthouses wouldn't spot him, pulling him away from Havre de Grace, away from Maryland, away from his corner store, away from Macbeth, away from the man in the blue suit, away from that cursed red sweater that still sat crumpled across from the windowsill, where the moonlight illuminated the bright red fabric. Thursday, October 23rd, 1969. Finney woke abruptly a few minutes before his alarm. He found himself staring at the ceiling until it went off. He continued staring, unsure what to do as it wailed uselessly on the nightstand. Does he go back to work? Does he leave town? Does he go to the sheriff? No, he couldn't go to the sheriff or leave town. Not yet. He needed answers. The corner store bell gave a weak jingle as Finney slipped inside, the morning sun hidden behind a suffocating wall of gray clouds. The man, of course, was already there, next to the register. He was wiping down the counter with his usual napkin. A newspaper sat folded neatly on the part of the counter that had already been wiped. Finney hesitated near the door. The man nodded politely. Finney said nothing. Finally, Finney crossed the creaky wooden floor, pretending to busy himself with the battered crate of records stacked by the far wall. His fingers leafed through the dusty sleeves. Johnny Cash, the Supremes, Wanda Jackson. But his mind was elsewhere. On the box at his door. On the sweater. On the man. The tension grew thicker than bisque. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "I saw you yesterday. After you left. Across the street from my house." The man gave no reaction. Finney swallowed. The Jimi Hendrix record in his hands suddenly felt too fragile, too loud. He set it down carefully and turned. "You left a box. A little gift right outside my door." The man still didn't look up. Finney took a slow step forward. "I think you know what was inside," he continued, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "A red sweater." Still nothing. Finney exhaled sharply through his nose as he walked right up to the counter. "It was Bobby's, wasn't it?" He curled his right hand into a fist, pounding it on the smooth formica. "Wasn't it?" Finally, the man shifted slightly, the barest flicker of movement, a breath, a blink. Finney's eyes darted down, and that's when he noticed it. An edition of the Havre Times, 2 days old, lying on the table between them. October 22nd, 1969, written by Eric Gold. Driscoll found dead in bay. Authorities have confirmed that the body of Robert Driscoll, reported missing last Friday, has been recovered at the mouth of the Susquehanna River near the Chesapeake Bay. Driscoll, aged 31, was found by Sheriff Paler following an anonymous tip. He was not wearing his red sweater. Havre de Grace Police Department has not released an official cause of death, but foul play is suspected. Locals are urged to remain vigilant. Finney's stomach twisted. There it was, in black and white, missing his sweater. Foul play. He looked back at the man, whose eyes were now steadily fixed on him. "Did you kill him?" Finney asked, voice cracking on the last word. A customer jostled the door open, rattling the bell, cutting the tension like a blunt knife. Finney jerked back instinctively, pasting on a shaky smile as a young woman wandered in, carrying a leather handbag and a handful of loose change. The man slowly folded the newspaper shut, creasing it neatly, and tucked it under his arm. Finney watched him for a long, taut second before forcing himself back behind the counter. He felt like he was walking across a tightrope suspended above the Grand Canyon. The conversation was over, for now. The woman smiled politely as she set down a pack of sewing needles and a jar of Granny Hawkins' old-fashioned dill pickles. Finney rang her up on autopilot. The day carried on like a tired sigh. Customers came and went, some looking for canned soup, some poking through the comic bins. One elderly man who insisted the store used to carry lemon drops and demanded to speak to the soused Englishman who sold them to him years ago. Finney tried to act normal. He even cracked a few jokes, but his mind kept drifting back to the newspaper, to Bobby, to the man whom he kept his distance from. The minutes crawled by. The sky outside shifted from gray to dark gray to the charcoal blue of dusk. At 6:57 p.m., just before closing, the man stood and walked quietly to the door. Finney moved to follow. "Hey, I'm not—" But the bell jingled. The door swung shut, and by the time Finney stepped outside, the man was gone. Finney sighed and returned inside, ready to flip the sign to closed, when the door slammed open again. "Wait, wait!" The baseball kid skidded across the tile, breathless, clutching a few coins and a bent dollar. "You're still open, right?" Finney blinked, then smiled faintly. "Geez, kid, barely. What you need? Still after Mickey Mantle?" "Yes, sir." The kid raced to the counter, eyes wide with excitement. "Tops pack, please. The red foil one." Finney rang him up, tossed in a bazooka gum for free, and watched as the boy bolted out again into the night, ripping the foil open before he even reached the sidewalk. Then the shop was quiet once more. Finney locked the door and left. Friday, October 24th, 1969. The next morning, the sun was unusually sharp for October. Finney arrived early. The man was already there, as usual. They exchanged no words. Finney didn't try. Not today. The hours passed without incident. The store had fallen into its familiar rhythm. Customers drifting through like ghosts, Finney restocking the shelves, the man ringing up purchases. At noon, the bell above the door jingled. Macbeth. He paused at the entrance, as if expecting to be yelled at. Finney just looked up from the register and said flatly, "What do you want?" Macbeth gave a long sigh. "Just grabbing my things." He shuffled behind the counter and crouched to rummage through his desk drawer. For once, he wasn't yelling, muttering or grumbling about government conspiracies. He didn't even seem intoxicated. Just quiet. Finney glanced over. "You find what you need?" Macbeth held up a crumpled photograph of a striking woman and an old tin of breath mints. "Just the essentials." He straightened up, hesitated. "You know, George," Macbeth started, "you've been a good mate for years, but you're a bloody hypocrite." Finney raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" "You blew up at me for leaving you to handle the shop alone." Macbeth's voice wasn't angry, more tired than anything. "But I've never pouted when you've gone off and done the same thing to me. Last Christmas, Independence Day weekend, end of September. Bloody hell, you did it 2 weeks ago." Finney cocked his head, looking confused. "I don't—" "No," Macbeth cut him off. "Save it for someone who still cares." They stood there in silence for a minute. Finally, Macbeth huffed and shook his head. "For the record, I still don't trust him." He jerked his thumb toward the counter, where the man was stacking books. "That weirdo you replaced me with. Saw him outside my house on Tuesday when we last spoke. He wasn't watching me. He was watching the road, but still, I don't like him. And I don't like you with him. Just be careful, mate, all right?" Finney didn't answer. Macbeth didn't wait for one. He turned and left, the bell over the door jingling faintly behind him. That night, Finney didn't eat dinner. He didn't even turn on the lights. He just sat in his kitchen, watching the faint glow of the moon as it crawled across his floor. Watching the new box he discovered on his porch, slightly smaller than the one that held the sweater from before, but still wrapped in the same faded red paper. He wanted nothing to do with this new box. But he had to open it, right? Finally, he built up the courage to grab it. He set it down on his kitchen table before slowly peeling it open. Inside was a baseball card. The blue ink of the autograph glistened in the moonlight. Jack DeLauro. The same card he'd seen 5 days ago. The same card the kid traded for. There was a slip of folded paper taped to the back of the card. Finney staggered back against the door frame, heart hammering so loudly he could hear it echoing in his ears. Written on the paper were 4 words, scrawled in tight, shaky handwriting. You were there too. Saturday, October 25th, 1969. Saturday morning, Finney didn't go to the shop. He couldn't. He sat at his kitchen table for hours, staring blankly as Jack DeLauro's face smiled back at him. The 4 words, "You were there too," burned into his brain like a metal brand. Finally, around noon, his nerves frayed to threads, he picked up the card and shoved it deep into the back of his junk drawer, under an old newspaper. Out of sight, out of mind. He told himself he'd call Macbeth, tell him everything, tell him he was right all along. but when he dialed Macbeth's number, there was no answer. He called again, only for the same result. Nothing but the repetitive chime of a recorder tone indicating a disconnected line. Finney slammed the phone down so hard it cracked the receiver. He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat up in his bed, staring at the sweater balled up in the corner, as if it would move if he looked away. Eventually, he fixed his gaze onto his reflection in the mirror on the wall. His reflection that didn't care whether he was good or bad, happy or depressed, scared or lonely. His reflection that was always the same stupid face staring back at him. He began to move restlessly from room to room, glancing out the window in the kitchen at the crooked street lamp across the road. It flickered now and then, buzzing faintly, casting long, strange shadows. Once, just once, he thought he saw the man standing there again. But when he blinked, it was only a twisted blue mailbox. Eventually, he returned to bed. It was then that he finally got some rest, if only for a few hours. Sunday, October 26th, 1969. Just as the first rays of sun began to crack through the blinds, Finney woke up, crawling out of bed and back into the kitchen. With shaky fingers, he dug into the junk drawer and pulled out the baseball card again, throwing the old newspaper that sat over it onto the kitchen table. He stared at Delaro's face for a long time before carefully slipping the card into his wallet and forcing himself to prepare breakfast. Toast, burnt, a hard-boiled egg, a glass of milk he borrowed from the store. Nothing tasted right. He tried to focus on the food, but his eyes kept flicking to the old newspaper. Finally, he read the headline. July 29th, 1969. Written by Eric Gold. Local clerk found dead in home. Martin Macbeth, a longtime clerk at Bayview Corner Store, was found deceased in his home yesterday afternoon. Neighbors contacted authorities after noticing a foul aroma and unusual silence. Upon entry, police discovered Macbeth unresponsive on the floor of his living room. The medical examiner has confirmed the cause of death as acute alcohol poisoning. Bottles of whiskey, gin, and beer were found scattered throughout the residence. Police report no signs of foul play. Macbeth was 42 years old, known for his blunt demeanor and loyal tenure at Bayview. He is survived only by his ex-wife, Caroline Hartsoe, who now lives in Nashville and has declined to comment. Finney dropped his fork. Egg yolk spurt across the table. He felt the blood drain from his face. That couldn't be right. He had spoken to Macbeth yesterday, hadn't he? The shouting, the picture of the woman, the tin of mints, the warning. But the paper was dated months ago. The rest of the day blurred. He didn't remember getting dressed, only that at some point he was back outside, back in front of the corner store. The bell jingled ever so faintly as he pushed open the door. And there he was, the man, of course, wiping down the counter with that same folded napkin. Finney stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a creak. The man nodded. Finney began walking towards the man. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want from me?" No answer. "I don't know what the hell is going on, and I can't help you until I do," Finney continued. "What do you want?" At last, the man set down the napkin. When he spoke, his voice was more confident than usual. Not hollow or timid, just real. "You keep asking the wrong questions." Finney stared. "Then what are the right ones?" The man tilted his head. What did you see? What do you remember? You were there. Finney's breath caught. I didn't... But you did. Finney was silent. The man continued. The guiltiest man is he who feigns innocence. Finney stammered. I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what you want from me. He lunged forward, fury overtaking fear. He grabbed the man's lapel, tried to shove him back, and stumbled through the air. There was no one there. Only the counter. Only silence. Finney stood alone, as he had for some time. Monday, October 27th, 1969. The following morning, Sheriff Paler stood in front of Bayview Corner Store. He sighed. A young boy had vanished a few days ago. Paler thinks the boy ran away from home. His parents swore he'd just gone out late for baseball cards and was to return within the hour. He checked the store Saturday, but it was closed. He went home and waited on a warrant. Now, Monday morning, the front door was unlocked. Someone had been there. Warrant in hand, he stepped inside. The bell jingled overhead. The place was silent. The register was untouched. The comics still neat in stacks. No sign of George Finney, the sole worker. Paler walked slowly toward the counter. A newspaper sat unfolded beneath the till. October 25th, 1969, written by Eric Gold. Local boy reported missing. It was Saturday's issue, announcing the boy's disappearance. Wait, that's odd. The words baseball cards in the article's body were circled in red ink. Next to the paper, Paler found a one-way plane ticket scheduled to depart from Baltimore that very morning. Flight TWA-11, BAL to SFO. There was no sign it had ever been used. Christ, George, thought Paler. San Francisco? There was just one more thing on the counter. A Jack DeLauro baseball card. Uncreased, autographed. 2 words written on the back. I remember. Thank you so much for coming by to Up Late with Ivy. I had a lot of fun reading this story and voicing it. Thank you so much to RespectTheFancy for allowing me to read this on my channel. I thought it was such an original idea with such an original premise, and I'm happy I got to read it. Links to support the author will be in the description as usual. And as always, it's only a story. See you later.